No one could explain why the humans were still there. That was the first problem. The second problem was that the humans appeared to be setting up camp. The report reached me mid-cycle, flagged with 3 separate urgency markers and one very confused annotation from a junior analyst who had written, "They are not retreating, they are unpacking." Unpacking? I leaned closer to the display, certain there had been a translation error. The battlefield, if it could even be called that, was already lost by every predictive model we had. Enemy fleets outnumbered the humans nearly 4 to 1. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their position was indefensible. According to every doctrine we had ever written, studied, or enforced, the humans should have fled hours ago. Instead, the footage showed them moving slowly and deliberately through the ruined settlement. Not in panic, not in formation. They were carrying crates. "Is that food?" I asked aloud, startling my aide. "Yes, observer," she replied hesitantly, "and portable shelters and medical units." Medical units? I zoomed in on the feed. Human soldiers, if that word even applied, were clearing debris from a collapsed structure. One of them paused, wiped sweat from his brow, and laughed. Actually laughed. Another responded with a comment I couldn't hear, but it caused 2 more to shake their heads and smile. They were joking. On a battlefield they were supposed to abandon? "Have they not received the withdrawal order?" I asked. "They have," my aide said. "Twice." The footage shifted. A human officer stood at the center of a makeshift command area, sleeves rolled up, helmet nowhere in sight. She was pointing at a map projected onto broken stone. Around her, others listened, not rigidly, not fearfully, but with the casual attention of beings discussing logistics over a shared meal. I waited for the fear. It never came. Instead, one of the humans raised a hand. "What about the civilians still trapped in Sector 3? The officer exhaled slowly. "How many?" "Unknown. Could be dozens." Another human frowned. "That's too many to leave." That sentence caused a ripple through the group. Not dissent. Agreement. I felt a chill travel down my spine. "They're discussing evacuation," my aide whispered. "But not theirs." I pulled back from the display, unsettled. "That makes no sense." "It does to them," she said quietly. The enemy forces were advancing. We could see them gathering at the perimeter, preparing to close in. This was the moment every species recognized, the moment when survival instinct screamed louder than duty. The humans heard it and ignored it. A new feed activated. A younger human sat on the ground beside a damaged structure, offering water to a trembling alien child. The child accepted it cautiously. The human smiled and said something soft, something meant to comfort. Why waste time? Why risk exposure? Why slow down? "Observer," my aide said, voice tight, "our models are failing." I watched as another human approached the officer. "We can still pull out if we move now." The officer shook her head. "Not yet." "Ma'am, we leave when everyone who can't defend themselves is out," she said, calm, final. That was when I realized the truth that would haunt every report afterward. The humans had already decided, not tactically, morally. They were not staying because they thought they could win. They were staying because leaving felt wrong. The enemy advance continued, weapons charged, signals flared. The galaxy moved exactly as expected. The humans did not. Instead, one of them keyed a transmitter, not to command, not to allies, but to an open civilian channel. "This is a human evacuation team. If you can hear this, we're here. Stay where you are. We'll come to you." My aide stared at me. They just announced their position. "Yes," I said slowly. "They did. A species that should have fled, a force that should have vanished. Instead, they made themselves easier to find. And for the first time since I began observing the humans, a thought formed. quiet, unwelcome, and deeply unsettling. This was not a mistake. This was a choice. And if this was how humans behaved when they were losing, I was no longer certain what would happen when they decided they could not leave. The battle hadn't started yet, but the rules already. If the humans had been silent, I might have understood them better. Silence, after all, is universal. Every species recognizes it as preparation for loss. But the humans were not silent. The next feed opened onto what my system labeled a temporary rest zone, though calling it that felt like a stretch. Half-collapsed buildings provided partial cover. Fires burned low, not for warmth but for cooking. Someone had dragged a long metal slab out of the rubble and turned it into a table. A table. Humans sat around it, helmets off, weapons leaned casually against broken walls like forgotten tools. One of them was stirring something in a dented container. "Is that soup?" I asked. My aide squinted. "I believe so, observer." Before I could respond, a loud burst of laughter cut through the feed. One human doubled over, nearly spilling the container, while another slapped the table. "I'm just saying, if this is how we go, I better not hear anyone complain about my cooking." "You poisoned us on our last stand. That's legacy material." "Worth it?" They laughed again. I stared at the display, unsettled in a way I struggled to articulate. Enemy scouts were less than a cycle away. Long-range sensors confirmed hostile weapons charging. Any rational species would be conserving energy, minimizing sound, bracing for impact. The humans were arguing about seasoning. "Observer," my aide said carefully, "this behavior does not align with stress responses." "No," I agreed. "It aligns with denial." She hesitated. "Or acceptance." That possibility disturbed me more. The feed shifted to a closer angle. A human medic moved between small groups, checking injuries with practiced efficiency. She paused beside one soldier, frowning. "You're limping." "It's fine." "It's not fine. It's character building." She rolled her eyes and knelt anyway. "You humans have a very strange relationship with pain." The soldier grinned. "We're friends." Nearby, two humans sat with their backs against a wall, sharing a ration pack. One nudged the other. "Hey, if we make it through this, drinks are on you." "When we make it through this." "Optimist." "Realist. I've seen you aim." I expected bravado. I expected false confidence masking fear. Instead, I saw something else entirely. Connection. They were not pretending the danger didn't exist. They were choosing not to let it isolate them. A warning indicator flashed across my console. Enemy formations were tightening. The window of retreat was closing rapidly. The humans knew this. One of them stood and stretched, glancing toward the skyline where distant flashes hinted at movement. "All right, showtime's coming." There was no panic in his voice, no urgency, just acknowledgement. Another human finished the soup and handed bowls around. "Eat now, you'll regret it later if you don't." Someone groaned. "That's ominous." "It's nutritional advice," the cook replied. I felt my unease deepen. Across the galaxy, we trained soldiers to compartmentalize, to suppress emotional bonds in combat situations because attachment led to hesitation. The humans did the opposite. They leaned into it. "Observer," my aide said quietly. "They are aware of the odds." "Yes, which makes this worse." The officer from earlier stepped into view, scanning the group. "Listen up. Enemy contact expected soon. Evac teams are still moving civilians through the lower sectors." A murmur passed through the humans. "How many left?" someone asked. "Too many, but we're not done." No one argued. No one suggested cutting losses. Instead, one human raised a hand. "If it goes bad, who falls back first?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "We hold, as long as we can." A pause. "And if we can't?" another asked. She met their eyes. "Then we buy time." The words settled over them, heavy but accepted. Someone exhaled slowly. "Guess that drink's still on me." A few chuckles followed, softer this time, tighter. The feed zoomed out, showing enemy silhouettes cresting the horizon. And still the humans laughed. Not because they were fearless, but because they refused to face fear alone. I leaned back, my thoughts racing. A species that joked before battle, that shared food on the edge of annihilation, that treated laughter as armor and connection as strategy. If this was how humans behaved before the fighting started, I found myself wondering what they would be like once the first shots were fired. And for the first time since assuming the role of observer, I felt something uncomfortably close to concern. Not for the humans, but for whoever was about to test them. The first shots were fired exactly when the models said they would be. That was the last thing that went according to plan. Enemy units breached the outer perimeter with overwhelming force, precision strikes, coordinated movement, textbook execution. From an observational standpoint, it was flawless and completely irrelevant. Because the humans didn't retreat. They didn't scatter, they didn't abandon the position, they didn't even reposition the way a rational force would when facing superior numbers. They stayed. "Observer," my aide said, fingers moving rapidly across her console. "Human units are not falling back." "I see that," I replied, my voice tight. The feed showed them bracing behind fractured structures, positioning themselves not at choke points or escape routes, but along the narrow streets leading deeper into the settlement. Into the civilian zones. "That's the wrong direction," I muttered. A human voice cut through the channel, calm and unmistakably clear. "Contact front. Keep them off the inner streets." Someone responded immediately. "Copy. Holding." Holding. I leaned forward, scanning tactical overlays. The humans were spreading out, not to maximize firepower, but to cover space. Every movement was calculated to block advance, not to survive it. "They're forming a line," my aide whispered. "Yes," I said slowly, "and it's a terrible one." The enemy advanced again, faster now, sensing weakness. Weapons flared, structures collapsed, dust and debris filled the air. The humans absorbed it. One unit was forced back, nearly overrun. According to probability, this was the moment they should have broken. Instead, another human sprinted into the open, dragging the wounded soldier back behind cover. "Are you insane?" someone shouted. "Probably, but you're heavy." A burst of fire struck the ground near them. They didn't stop. I felt my hands curl into fists without realizing it. "This position cannot be held," my aide said. "They are bleeding resources." "Yes," I replied, "and they know it." The officer from earlier appeared on the feed again, issuing orders with quiet precision. "Fall back to the secondary line. Not all the way, just enough." A human frowned. "That exposes the evac route." "It does," she agreed, "which is why Alpha stays." A pause. Alpha acknowledges. No protest, no hesitation. Alpha Squad moved forward instead of back, planting themselves in the rubble of a collapsed building directly in the enemy's path. I stared at the tactical display, disbelief giving way to something colder. "They are sacrificing units," I said. "No," my aide replied softly. "They're sacrificing outcomes." The enemy pressed harder, clearly expecting the humans to break. They didn't. They held. They adjusted. They covered each other. They shouted warnings and encouragement in equal measure. A human was knocked off his feet by a concussive blast. Another dragged him up. "Still with us?" "Unfortunately." "Good. We're not done." Civilians continued to move behind the line, slowly, painfully, but moving. The humans watched them go, then turned back towards the enemy. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. Every second mattered. Every step backward was measured. "This makes no sense," I said, the words tasting hollow. "They are choosing loss." My aide shook her head. "They're choosing time." The enemy finally realized the truth and reacted with sudden aggression, surging forward in force. Human casualties spiked. Still, the line held. Barely. One of the humans keyed a channel, voice strained but steady. "Evac route is clear." The officer closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. "Copy. All units, secondary withdrawal." They pulled back at last, not because they were beaten, but because their purpose had been fulfilled. The enemy took the ground immediately, triumphant. Too late. The civilians were gone. The humans regrouped behind the next line, battered, exhausted, but alive. I leaned back, my mind racing. A stand that gained nothing. A defense that protected no territory. A battle fought for people who could not fight back. The models recalculated. They failed again. And for the first time, I understood the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was their willingness to lose, as long as someone else got to live. The fighting slowed before it stopped. That alone was unusual. Battles rarely fade. They end abruptly, in victory or collapse. This one thinned out like a storm losing interest, bursts of violence giving way to pockets of uneasy quiet. That was when the humans did something no model had prepared us for. They left cover. I watched in disbelief as several human figures emerged cautiously from behind ruined structures, weapons lowered but not discarded. One raised an open hand toward the opposing force. "Cease fire," the voice said over an open channel. "Wounded on the field." My aide blinked. "Observer, they're signaling medical intent." I stared at the display. To the enemy. Enemy soldiers lay scattered among the debris, some unmoving, others clearly injured and struggling to crawl away. Any rational doctrine would classify them as liabilities, best ignored or eliminated. The humans classified them as patients. A human medic knelt beside a fallen enemy combatant, her movements efficient and practiced. She spoke calmly, even gently, while applying a sealant to a torn limb. "I know," she said softly. "I know it hurts. Don't move." The enemy soldier flinched, not from pain, but from confusion. Another human approached, hands raised, carrying a portable stretcher. "They're helping them," my aide whispered. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely audible. "I see that." An enemy officer appeared on the edge of the feed, weapon half raised, uncertain. He hesitated, clearly torn between firing and understanding what he was seeing. A human looked up at him. "You're injured too," she said. "Sit down." The officer froze. That command held no threat, no leverage, just concern. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the enemy officer lowered his weapon. I felt something shift in my chest, an unfamiliar pressure. The humans moved methodically, treating wounds regardless of uniform or allegiance. They didn't prioritize their own first. They didn't interrogate. They didn't demand surrender. They simply worked. One human paused, glancing at a badly wounded enemy soldier. "We need a med evac," he said. A voice crackled back. "That's enemy." "I know. They're still breathing." Silence followed. Then, "Copy." I leaned back, stunned. "Observer," my aide said, struggling to keep her composure. "This is dangerous." "Yes," I agreed. "For them." "No," she corrected softly. "For the galaxy." The enemy soldiers watched the humans with expressions I had only seen once before, in newly contacted species encountering fire for the first time. Awe mixed with fear, with disbelief, with something like shame. One of the wounded enemy finally spoke, voice trembling. "Why?" A human medic glanced up. "Why what?" "Why help us?" The human shrugged. "Because you're hurt." "That's not an answer," the enemy insisted. The human smiled faintly. It is where I'm from. I realized then that the humans were doing more than saving lives. They were breaking rules. Rules about war, rules about power, rules about who deserved mercy. Rules that the galaxy had depended on for centuries. The ceasefire held longer than expected, not because of treaties or threats, but because no one wanted to be the one who resumed violence after witnessing that. Eventually, evacuation craft arrived, for both sides. As the last wounded were carried away, I saw a human soldier offer his canteen to an enemy who stared at it like it might vanish. "Drink," the human said. "You'll need it." The enemy accepted it with shaking hands. The feed ended shortly after. I sat in silence, my thoughts racing faster than my aid's analysis tools. Humans who stayed when they should have fled, who stood when they should have retreated, who healed when they should have conquered. This wasn't compassion as weakness. This was compassion as policy. And as I prepared my report, one conclusion crystallized with terrifying clarity. A species willing to treat its enemies as people was a species that could never be controlled by fear. The galaxy had just witnessed something irreversible, and it would never forget it. The signal went out before anyone could stop it. That was not an exaggeration. I know because 3 separate command channels lit up at once, each one demanding confirmation, cancellation, or explanation, while the transmission continued to broadcast calmly, steadily, and without encryption. My aide stared at her console. "Observer, that channel is open band." "Yes," I said slowly, "I can see that." Open band meant anyone could hear it. Civilians, mercenaries, neutral fleets, hostile forces. The kind of message you only sent if you wanted to be found. A human voice filled the room, level and unmistakably tired. "This is a human evacuation and medical unit operating in the lower districts. If you are injured, unarmed, or unable to move, respond with your location. We will come to you." I waited for the follow-up. The warning, the conditions, the threat. None came. My aide's fingers hovered uselessly over her controls. "They're inviting responses." "From everyone," I said. The tactical overlays updated in real time. Pings began to appear across the map, some civilian, some unknown, some unmistakably hostile. Each response was a risk. Each one narrowed the human's margin for survival. And still, the signal continued. A human officer appeared on the feed, headset slightly askew, eyes scanning the ruins around her. Someone beside her hissed, "You just painted a target on us." She nodded. "I know." "You didn't have to." "Yes," she interrupted gently. "I did." The enemy intercepted the signal within moments. We saw their formations shift, redirecting towards the broadcast origin. "They're converging," my aide said. "This will accelerate engagement." "Yes," I replied. "That is the point." I leaned forward, unease tightening my chest. "They are not asking for help." "No," she said. "They are offering it." The humans moved faster now. Not in panic, never panic, but with purpose sharpened by inevitability. Teams split off, responding to the nearest signals first. Every detour pulled them further from defensible ground. One human keyed his mic. "We've got a response in Sector 5. Heavy injuries." "Copy," the officer said. "You're not alone." Another voice cut in. "Unknown contact responding. Could be a trap." The officer didn't hesitate. "Then we go careful." "That's not what I meant." "I know." A civilian signal blinked out suddenly, cut short. A human cursed under their breath. "We're too late." The officer closed her eyes for half a second. Then, "Mark it. Keep moving." I realized something then, something that made my pulse spike. "I think they know this will cost them," I said. My aide nodded. "They're choosing it anyway." The enemy's advance tightened.
Weapons charged. Fire began to rain down again, heavier this time, more focused. The humans took losses they could not afford. And still, the signal did not stop. "If you can hear this," the voice repeated, hoarse now, "we're still coming." I watched an enemy commander hesitate at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the broadcast data. This was not fear, it was uncertainty. Because this signal violated every assumption the galaxy held about war. It did not threaten, it did not deceive, it did not demand surrender. It announced intent and accepted the consequences. "Observer," my aide whispered, "Command is requesting you recommend signal termination." I didn't answer right away, because I knew the truth. The signal should never have been sent. It endangered everyone who broadcast it. It gave the enemy every advantage. And yet, it was already doing something far more dangerous. Others were listening. Not just civilians, not just enemies. Other species, other fleets, other commanders who had been waiting for a reason to act and had just been given one. The signal continued to echo across open space. And for the first time since this conflict began, the galaxy was no longer watching to see who would win. It was watching to see who would answer.
The signal went out before anyone could stop it. That was not an exaggeration. I know because 3 separate command channels lit up at once, each one demanding confirmation, cancellation, or explanation, while the transmission continued to broadcast calmly, steadily, and without encryption. My aide stared at her console. "Observer, that channel is open band." "Yes," I said slowly, "I can see that." Open band meant anyone could hear it. Civilians, mercenaries, neutral fleets, hostile forces. The kind of message you only sent if you wanted to be found. A human voice filled the room, level and unmistakably tired. "This is a human evacuation and medical unit operating in the lower districts. If you are injured, unarmed, or unable to move, respond with your location. We will come to you." I waited for the follow-up. The warning, the conditions, the threat. None came. My aide's fingers hovered uselessly over her controls. "They're inviting responses." "From everyone," I said. The tactical overlays updated in real time. Pings began to appear across the map, some civilian, some unknown, some unmistakably hostile. Each response was a risk. Each one narrowed the human's margin for survival. And still, the signal continued. A human officer appeared on the feed, headset slightly askew, eyes scanning the ruins around her. Someone beside her hissed, "You just painted a target on us." She nodded. "I know." "You didn't have to." "Yes," she interrupted gently. "I did." The enemy intercepted the signal within moments. We saw their formations shift, redirecting towards the broadcast origin. "They're converging," my aide said. "This will accelerate engagement." "Yes," I replied. "That is the point." I leaned forward, unease tightening my chest. "They are not asking for help." "No," she said. "They are offering it." The humans moved faster now, not in panic, never panic, but with purpose sharpened by inevitability. Teams split off, responding to the nearest signals first. Every detour pulled them further from defensible ground. One human keyed his mic. "We've got a response in Sector 5. Heavy injuries." "Copy," the officer said. "You're not alone." Another voice cut in. "Unknown contact responding. Could be a trap." The officer didn't hesitate. "Then we go careful." "That's not what I meant." "I know." A civilian signal blinked out suddenly, cut short. A human cursed under their breath. "We're too late." The officer closed her eyes for half a second. Then, "Mark it. Keep moving." I realized something then, something that made my pulse spike. "I think they know this will cost them," I said.
My aide nodded. They're choosing it anyway. The enemy's advance tightened, weapons charged, fire began to rain down again, heavier this time, more focused. The humans took losses they could not afford. And still, the signal did not stop. "If you can hear this," the voice repeated, hoarse now, "we're still coming." I watched an enemy commander hesitate at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the broadcast data. This was not fear, it was uncertainty. Because this signal violated every assumption the galaxy held about war. It did not threaten, it did not deceive, it did not demand surrender. It announced intent and accepted the consequences. "Observer," my aide whispered, "Command is requesting you recommend signal termination." I didn't answer right away, because I knew the truth. The signal should never have been sent. It endangered everyone who broadcast it. It gave the enemy every advantage. And yet, it was already doing something far more dangerous. Others were listening. Not just civilians, not just enemies. Other species, other fleets, other commanders who had been waiting for a reason to act and had just been given one. The signal continued to echo across open space. And for the first time since this conflict began, the galaxy was no longer watching to see who would win. It was watching to see who would answer.
The escape window opened exactly when predicted. A corridor of clear space tore through the chaos, temporary, narrow, and unmistakably deliberate. An Allied extraction fleet had arrived on the edge of sensor range, their presence announced not with bravado, but with efficiency. Coordinates flashed, timers appeared. A way out. My aide exhaled sharply. "Observer, extraction is viable." "Yes," I said, "for the first time since this began." The humans saw it too. A human officer glanced at the updated map, eyes tracking the glowing corridor like a promise. Someone near her let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to relief. "We can make that," a voice said. "All teams if we move now." The words hung there, hopeful, tempting, human. Another voice answered, quieter. "What about the responders still inbound?" Silence. I watched the officer's jaw tighten. She zoomed the map, overlaying the open band distress pings. Several were still active, a few were blinking weakly, their signals fading in and out. "They're too far," someone said. "We won't get back in time." "We don't have to," another replied. "We've done enough." I felt my pulse quicken. This was the moment. The point where every rational species chose survival and called it wisdom. The officer keyed her mic. "Status check?" Teams responded one by one, wounded but mobile, ammunition low, time thinner than it had ever been. She nodded once. "Extraction is available." A murmur rippled through the channel. Then she added, "It's optional." Optional. My aides stared at me. "That's not how evacuation orders work." "No, that's how choices work." One of the humans spoke up, voice strained. "If we go, those signals go unanswered." Another answered immediately. "If we stay, we might not make it." A pause. Then a third voice, calm, steady. "If we leave now, we know exactly who we're leaving behind." No one argued with that. The officer inhaled slowly. "All right," she said. "Anyone who needs extraction, take it now. No judgment." No movement. Seconds passed. The corridor flickered, unstable. "Last call," she said. Still nothing. The officer closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "All right," she said. "We stay." My aide's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're refusing escape." "Yes," I replied, "and they know what that means." The extraction fleet hailed them, confusion edging into urgency. Human unit, your window is collapsing. Copy, the officer replied. Proceed without us. A beat. Say again? We'll catch the next one, she said. There are still people calling. The corridor collapsed. The map dimmed. The way out vanished like it had never existed. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. They had not stayed because they believed in victory. They had not stayed because of pride or defiance. They stayed because someone was still asking for help. The humans turned back towards the ruins, towards the signals, towards the enemy lines tightening once more. Weapons were checked, medical kits redistributed. No speeches were made. Someone muttered, "Guess we're committed now." Another replied, "We were always committed." The feeds showed enemy forces reorienting, emboldened by the humans' choice. Loss projections spiked sharply. My aide swallowed. "Observer, this decision will cost them." "Yes," I said quietly. And that was when I understood the pattern that had eluded our models from the beginning. Humans did not calculate survival the way we did. They calculated abandonment. And once they decided they were not the ones who left, no amount of danger could convince them otherwise. The escape was possible. They chose not to take it. And in doing so, they made something terrifyingly clear. If a human promised to come for you, they would not stop. Not even when the universe finally offered them a way out. The first response did not come through official channels. That should have been my warning. My console chimed softly. Not an alarm, not a priority flag, just a quiet acknowledgement ping. I frowned and expanded the source. An independent vessel, civilian registry, no military designation. My aide leaned closer. "Observer, they're responding to the open band signal." I felt my breath catch. That channel wasn't meant for... Another ping interrupted me. Then another. And another. The map began to change. Small icons appeared at the edges of sensor range. Traders, survey ships, outdated patrol craft that should have stayed well clear of an active war zone. Their trajectories were hesitant, uneven, but unmistakably convergent. "They're not under any command," my aide whispered. "No shared protocol, no orders." I watched one vessel hesitate, drift, then correct course toward the human position. "Why would they do that?" she asked. I didn't answer, because the answer was forming on its own. The open band signal was still broadcasting, hoarse now, distorted by interference, but steady. "If you can hear this, we're still coming." The humans noticed the incoming contacts almost immediately. A voice crackled over their channel. Command? We've got unknowns inbound." The officer checked the feed, her brow furrowed. "Identify." "Mixed signatures, civilian-grade hulls, old tech." A pause. "They're answering," someone said quietly. The first ship broke atmosphere under fire, shields flaring. It wasn't fast, it wasn't well armed, it shouldn't have survived. But it did. A voice came through, strained, accented, unmistakably nervous. "This is Free Trader Hearthlight. We heard the call. We've got med supplies and evac space." The channel went silent. Then the officer replied, carefully, "You shouldn't be here." "We know. Where do you need us?" I saw a human smile through the smoke and exhaustion. Another ship followed, then another. A small escort wing from a species that had declared neutrality centuries ago. A medical barge from a border world with no stake in the conflict. Even an outdated patrol craft from a minor coalition, its captain broadcasting openly. "We can't fight, but we can carry." The enemy noticed too late. Their formations faltered, not from fear, but confusion. These were not reinforcements by any definition they recognized. No treaty bound them, no threat compelled them. They came anyway. "Observer," my aide said, voice shaking. "This is spreading." "Yes," I replied softly. "It was always going to." The humans adjusted instantly, not to command, but to accommodate. Civilians route to incoming ships. Med teams coordinate with volunteers, cover the approach lanes. No one asked who was in charge. No one demanded allegiance. They simply made room. A human helped guide a trembling alien medic through debris. "You're doing great," he said. "Just follow me." The medic stared at him. "Why are you letting us help?" The human shrugged. "Because you showed up." More icons appeared. The map grew crowded. What had begun as a desperate stand was becoming something else entirely. A network. A choice made visible. My aide swallowed hard. "Observer, this violates every balance model we have." "Yes," I said, unable to look away. "Because it isn't balanced." The enemy withdrew slightly, reassessing. They had planned for resistance. They had planned for reinforcements. They had not planned for volunteers. As the first civilians were loaded onto non-human ships, I realized the true significance of what I was witnessing. The humans had not inspired obedience. They had inspired participation. And once that began, once others chose to answer not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to, the conflict was no longer contained. It was no longer predictable. The humans had sent a signal that should never have been sent. And now the galaxy was replying. Not with fleets, not with declarations, but with something far more dangerous: solidarity. The battle did not end with a victory announcement. There was no decisive charge, no final explosion that marked the turning point. No moment where one side collapsed and the other stood triumphant amid the wreckage. Instead, the fighting thinned. Fire became sporadic. Movements slowed. Orders turned into questions, and questions went unanswered as commanders stared at a situation their training had never prepared them for. On paper, nothing had changed. Enemy forces still outnumbered the humans and their volunteers. The terrain was still compromised. Supplies were still low. Casualty counts were still unacceptable. And yet, the map looked different. Evacuation lanes glowed where none should have existed. Civilian icons blinked from danger to safety. Volunteer ships moved in careful, coordinated patterns that hadn't been planned by any central authority. The humans were still holding, not advancing, not retreating, holding. "Observer," my aide said quietly, "the enemy is disengaging." I leaned forward. "Confirm." "They're pulling units back from the intersectors. They're making room." Making room. I watched an enemy commander on the edge of the feed lower his weapon slowly, eyes tracking a convoy of civilian transports slipping past his position. He could have fired. He didn't. Another enemy unit retreated from a narrow street just as a mixed group of humans and volunteers guided injured civilians through it. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The humans simply kept working. A human soldier slumped against a wall, breathing hard. A volunteer medic knelt beside him, hands shaking as she wrapped a bandage. You saved my sister," she said, voice breaking. The human shook his head. "We helped. You got her out." "That still counts," she replied. Somewhere else, a human officer stood beside an enemy counterpart, neither raising their weapon. "This isn't over," the enemy said. "I know, but it's done for today." A long pause. Agreed. The feeds showed it happening again and again, small, quiet decisions stacking on top of each other until the battle lost its momentum. No one surrendered. No one claimed victory. They just stopped trying to destroy each other. From a strategic perspective, it was infuriating. From a historical one, it was unprecedented. My aide stared at the displays, struggling to process the data. Observer, there's no clear outcome. Yes, that's what changed. On the ground, the last evacuation ship lifted off under light fire that quickly ceased. A human watched it rise, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "We got them out," someone said. "Not all," another replied. "But enough. Enough." The enemy withdrew to defensive positions. The humans regrouped with their volunteers, tending wounds, counting the missing, saying names softly so they wouldn't be forgotten. The territory remained contested. The war was not over. And yet, something irreversible had happened. The humans had not won territory. They had not claimed resources. They had not broken the enemy's forces. They had broken an assumption. That power came from dominance, that fear decided outcomes, that compassion was a liability to be exploited. The battle ended without a victor, because victory had stopped being the point. As I compiled my report, my aide spoke the question that had been forming in my own mind. Observer, how do we classify this engagement? I watched a final feed. Humans and volunteers sharing water in the ruins. Enemy soldiers keeping their distance, not out of fear, but uncertainty. "I don't think we do," I said quietly. "We remember it." Because nothing on the battlefield had truly changed. The lines would be drawn again, the conflict would continue elsewhere. But everything that mattered had shifted. The galaxy had just seen a battle where survival wasn't the goal, and realized that kind of fight was the most dangerous one of all. The galaxy did not react the way it usually did. There were no emergency decrees, no mass mobilizations, no sudden realignments of fleets or borders. Instead, there was a pause, quiet, prolonged, and deeply uncomfortable. Reports arrived slowly, not the kind filled with casualty counts or territorial changes, but stranger ones. Ones that clerks reread before forwarding. Ones that analysts flagged and then hesitated to classify. Humans refused extraction. Humans treated enemy wounded. Non-aligned vessels voluntarily entered a combat zone. Enemy units disengaged without orders. Each report ended the same way. Motivation unclear. I sat in the observation chamber long after the feeds went dark, reviewing the compiled data. Every model we had relied on, every assumption about deterrence, fear, and power, had failed to account for what had happened. My aide broke the silence. "Observer, Command wants your final assessment." I didn't answer right away. Across the galaxy, conversations were happening in low voices. On trade worlds, merchants argued over drinks. On border stations, guards hesitated before enforcing old rules. In council chambers, officials asked questions that had never been asked aloud. What do humans want? What will they demand in return? How do we stop this from happening again? That last question came up more than the others, because the truth was unsettling. The humans hadn't expanded their territory. They hadn't seized resources. They hadn't issued ultimatums. They had simply shown up and refused to leave people behind. A junior analyst submitted a summary that made several senior officials uncomfortable. Human influence appears to spread without coercion. That sentence was underlined in red. On one world, an officer delayed an order to fire because he remembered a report about humans carrying enemy wounded. On another, a transport captain altered course to answer a distress call, just in case. Small decisions, individual choices, the kind that couldn't be sanctioned or punished without exposing fear. My aide looked at me. Why are they afraid, observer? I finally spoke. Because compassion like that can't be controlled. She frowned. Compassion is inefficient. Yes, I agreed. And contagious. The galaxy had long believed fear was the strongest motivator, that survival instincts could be predicted, exploited, and turned into leverage. Humans had broken that equation. They had demonstrated a behavior that made no strategic sense and yet reshaped outcomes anyway. They did not compel loyalty. They did not extract obedience. They inspired people to act on their own. That was the threat. Because once a species proves it will stay when escape is possible, once it proves it will help without demanding payment, once it proves it will treat even enemies as people, you can no longer rely on fear to keep the system intact. The final report asked for a concluding statement. I stared at the blank field longer than necessary. Then I typed. Humans are not dangerous because they are powerful. They are dangerous because they choose to care, even when it costs them, and they do not stop others from doing the same. My aide read it silently. That will cause concern. Yes, I said, it should. Somewhere far from the battlefield, a distress signal would be sent again one day. Someone would be trapped. Someone would call out, uncertain anyone would answer. And now the galaxy knew something it could never forget. If humans heard that call, they might come. Not to conquer, not to claim, not to rule, just to help. And that was why the galaxy learned to fear human compassion. Because once you've seen a species choose others over itself, you can never be certain where they'll draw the line or how far they'll go to protect it.